He had never performed with them. He wasn't even supposed to be there. But that night, in a quiet rehearsal room in Los Angeles, Steve Perry walked up to the mic and sang. 30 seconds later, the band knew. This wasn't just a new voice, but the one thing that could save Journey from vanishing forever. San Francisco in the early 1970s was electric. The city had become a great place for experimental music, and the fading embers of the hippie era still glowed in the underground clubs and crowded jam sessions. But while most people were chasing sound through chaos and noise, one man was sketching out something more deliberate. Walter "Herbie" Herbert had a plan. He had spent years behind the scenes managing logistics for Santana, one of the most respected Latin rock bands of the time. He saw what worked, and more importantly, what didn't. Talent alone was never enough. Without direction, without discipline, even the most gifted musicians ended up broke or forgotten. So he thought of a different approach. What if, instead of waiting for magic to happen, he built it piece by piece? He began calling in favors and reaching out to players who had chops but weren't tied down. That was when he connected with Greg Rowley and Neil Schon. Both had just left Santana. Rowley was known for his gritty organ playing and unmistakable vocals. Schon was barely 20, but already carried the kind of guitar skills that could stop a room cold. They were burned out on Santana's constant touring and ready for a clean start. And they weren't the only ones. Bassist Ross Valerie came from the Steve Miller Band. George Tickner was a rhythm guitarist with a strong jazz rock background. Prairie Prince stepped in on drums, bringing both technical skill and a flair for showmanship. His idea was to make them a kind of supergroup for hire. They would be the musical backbone for other artists. The group needed a name, and at first they chose something as forgettable as their purpose. The Golden Gate Rhythm Section. It sounded like a calendar listing. Functional, local, forgettable. And yet, something strange happened. As they began playing together more frequently, their chemistry grew stronger. Soon they realized they didn't want to be anyone's background band. They had their own ideas, their own sound, and if they didn't bet on themselves, no one else would. The turning point came when a roadie, someone just hanging around rehearsal, casually suggested a name. Journey. One word. Simple. Universal. It didn't sound like jazz or soul or blues. It sounded like movement. But naming themselves wasn't enough to win over the world. Their first 3 albums came out between 1975 and 1977, and they flopped. Not completely, but enough to cause concern. Columbia Records was growing impatient. They had invested in a group that clearly had talent but no commercial edge. After the 3rd album underperformed again, they called Herbert and gave him a clear message. Evolve or disappear. Inside the band, the mood turned grim. They realized they couldn't afford to be purists anymore. If they wanted to survive, they needed something they didn't yet have. A new direction and a new voice. By the time 1977 arrived, Journey was out of excuses. 3 albums in, their blend of jazz fusion and progressive rock had earned them respect among musicians. But that wasn't enough. Respect didn't fill arenas. It didn't move records. The truth was simple and brutal. They were losing, and the label was running out of patience. That's when they brought in Robert Fleischman. He had the look, he had the range, and he fit into the mold of what labels were looking for at the time. With him, the band started leaning toward a more commercial sound, something closer to what Foreigner and Boston were doing. Music built around strong vocals, big hooks, and emotional impact. On paper, it worked, but something wasn't clicking. Fleischman couldn't find his place within the group. Tensions rose behind the scenes. Creative differences turned into personal friction. He didn't connect with the other members. Worse, he didn't connect with Herbie Herbert, who had built this band like a chessboard piece by piece. And now, he was quietly preparing for another move. Herbert began scanning demos again, not for another singer, but for the right singer, the one who could bring warmth and edge. That's when he heard a tape from a little-known band called Alien Project. The song was rough, unpolished, But the voice that came through was undeniable and belonged to Steve Perry. At the time, Perry wasn't chasing fame. He had left music behind after a tragic loss. A former bandmate had died in a car crash, and with that, Perry had given up. He returned to Hanford, California, working construction jobs and helping on his stepfather's turkey farm. But talent doesn't die quietly. When Herbert reached out, Perry was hesitant. This wasn't just another gig because Journey already had a singer, but Herbert arranged for a secret audition in Los Angeles. During a break in rehearsal, Perry stepped in and he walked to the mic and started singing. What happened next was immediate. The band stopped thinking, they felt. By the end of that year, Perry was the new frontman. His first performance with the band happened in San Francisco. It wasn't a massive show, it didn't need to be. The transformation had already begun. In 1978, the band released Infinity. It was their fourth album, but in many ways, it felt like their debut. Tracks like Lights and Wheel in the Sky finally connected with audiences beyond musicians and critics. They weren't playing for approval anymore, but for people who sang back. The album broke into the Billboard Top 100. Infinity reached number 21 and gave Journey their first platinum record. The change was working, and it wasn't just about chart positions. Steve Perry's voice became the soul of the band. He didn't overpower the music, he elevated it. With the success of Infinity, Journey had momentum. The following year, they released Evolution, featuring Lovin' Touchin' Squeezin', which became their first single to enter the Billboard Top 20. Then came Departure in 1980, reaching number 8. Songs like Any Way You Want It became arena staples. By the time Greg Rowley left the band, he was exhausted. The sound had changed, the mission had changed. And he passed the torch to Jonathan Cain, a multi-talented keyboardist and songwriter who would become Steve Perry's perfect creative counterpart. Just like that, Journey was no longer just a group of skilled players trying to stay afloat, as they had become the voice of something bigger, something that fans across the world would soon hear for the first time and never forget.
Don't stop.
The idea began years before the song ever existed. Long before he joined Journey, Jonathan Cain was just another struggling musician in Los Angeles, broke, lost, and full of doubt. One night, with everything weighing on him, he called his father back in Chicago. He told him he was thinking of giving up, that the dream was too far, that maybe it wasn't going to happen. His father listened in silence, then gave him a line that would stay with him forever. Don't stop believing, that was it. 4 words, a command, a hope, a promise. Cain wrote it down in his notebook. Years later, after he joined Journey, Cain remembered that line when he sat down with Steve Perry to write. They were working on material for a new album because Perry wanted a song with heart. Cain opened his notebook and showed him the phrase, and Perry's eyes lit up. That's it, he said. That's the idea. Together, they started building the melody. Neil Schon added guitar parts that felt like neon lights flashing past the window of a night train. Ross Valerie and Steve Smith laid down a rhythm that pulsed with quiet tension. But it was Perry who gave the song its shape. His voice walked through the verses like a traveler moving through a half-lit city. Just a small-town girl, just a city boy. They weren't cliches, they were everyone. In 1981, Journey released Escape. It wasn't just an album, but a breakthrough. Their sound had evolved again, cleaner, sharper, and more focused. The song wasn't an instant number 1. In fact, it peaked at number 9 on the Billboard Hot 100. But it didn't matter. It had something bigger than a chart position. Escape became the best-selling album in Journey's career. Over 9 million copies sold, certified 9 times platinum. And it wasn't just Don't Stop Believin' that fueled the momentum, because songs like Open Arms and Who's Crying Now reached the top 10. Open Arms in particular held the number 2 spot on the Billboard charts for 6 straight weeks. Their music was everywhere, on radio, on television, in stadiums. Journey had gone from fighting to survive to defining an entire sound. Years later, the song would find a second life. In 2007, it played over the final scene of The Sopranos, freezing the world in a single uncertain moment. Then again in Glee, giving it new meaning to a new generation. That some dreams are worth chasing, even when the world tells you to stop. Coming to this point, I have an important question for you. After hearing how it was created, do you think Don't Stop Believin' is Journey's most important song, or is there another track that defines them better? Drop your opinion in the comments. I'd love to know what you think.
And the sun shines on. She said, "Any way you want."
By the early 1980s, Journey had reached a place few bands ever touch. They weren't just successful, they were iconic. Steve Perry's voice was everywhere. Jonathan Cain's songwriting had struck a nerve. Neil Sean's guitar leads were instantly recognizable. To the outside world, they were unstoppable. But inside the machine, the story was more complicated. Success brings pressure, fame magnifies tension, and the bigger Journey got, the more cracks began to show beneath the surface. They were constantly touring, barely stopping to breathe. City after city, show after show, the band was burning through miles and emotions. Steve Perry, in particular, began to wear down. His voice was a gift, but also a burden, because every night he was expected to deliver perfection. And that pressure didn't just come from fans, it came from within. Beyond the stage, Perry was facing something no one else could see. His mother had fallen seriously ill. Between the relentless pace of the band and the pain of watching someone he loved fade away, he began to unravel. He didn't explode, he didn't fall apart publicly, but slowly, quietly, he began to retreat. In 1987, after a run of hit records and sold-out tours, Perry stepped away. For fans, it was confusing, and for the band, it was devastating. They had spent a decade building something powerful, and now their voice, their centerpiece, was gone. Journey tried to continue. They brought Perry back briefly in 1996 to record Trial by Fire, and somehow the album sold well. But Perry suffered a hip injury not long after, and the band wanted to tour. He hesitated and they couldn't wait. The decision came hard but final. They replaced him. The departures didn't end there. Over the years, Journey would cycle through vocalists. Steve Augeri, Jeff Scott Soto, and eventually Arnel Pineda, who was discovered on YouTube singing Journey covers with uncanny precision. Each new voice brought their own energy, but none could truly replace what Perry had meant. He hadn't just been the sound of Journey, but its heart. In 2012, the track crossed the 18 million mark in sales. Forbes named it the greatest song of all time based on combined metrics of longevity, cultural impact, and digital performance. Later, in 2017, Journey was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. For that night, Perry returned, but he didn't sing. He stood with his former bandmates on the stage, and the crowd gave him a standing ovation that lasted long after he stepped back into the wings. It was a reminder that his absence had never been about indifference. Some bands are defined by their rhythm, others by their riffs, but Journey was defined by a feeling. And sometimes all it takes is one voice, one phrase, one song to remind the world of what's possible when you refuse to stop believing. And that's what makes Journey's story hit different. Not just the fame, not just the records, but the fact that behind every chorus, every lyric, every packed stadium, there was struggle, risk. People betting everything on a sound that wasn't guaranteed to work. And somehow it did, because sometimes one voice really can change everything. One idea, one song, that's not just music. That's human, that's real. So if you felt something during this video, whether you're a longtime fan or just discovering Journey now, let me know in the comments what part of their story hit you the hardest. And if there's another band or song with a story like this, drop it down there too. If you enjoyed this, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. We've got way more music stories headed your way.